So as I've mentioned in other videos, the CDC provided 6 pieces of advice. Sometimes I'm condensing it down into 5, but 6 pieces of advice on how to approach your own mental health during a time of crisis. Their article is called Coping with a Disaster or Traumatic Event. So the first of these is taking care of your body. And specifically they say try to eat healthy, well-balanced meals, exercise regularly, and get plenty of sleep. Avoid alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. Learn more about wellness strategies for mental health. So these are their specific recommendations, and I just wanted to dig in a little bit to these in case my experience and point of view is useful to anyone. So take care of your body, first of all. Try to eat healthy, well-balanced meals. So healthy, well-balanced meals take effort. They take thought, because it takes some conscious thought to discern what is a healthy meal as opposed to a non-unhealthy meal. It takes some rational thought. Our instincts can tell us what is a yummy meal, right? My instincts doesn't require any thought, any education, etc. So it actually requires some thought to have a healthy meal, a well-balanced meal. You have to think about, what you're eating at different times. There's a bit of planning. It's doesn't really go hand in hand with impulse eating, for example, or emotional eating if you want. So it takes a bit of education, but then more importantly, it takes some willpower. It takes a sustained determination. So that means that a large proportion of society has either not received the education or doesn't have the willpower to sustain a healthy, well-balanced diet, or there are other circumstances putting them at a disadvantage, like they're in a food desert, urban food desert, for example, with only access to junk food. But for folks who have enough money and access to food to get access to healthy food, then that is typically not the obstacle that they're facing. It's typically not a financial obstacle. But so that there's no shortage of advice on healthy eating. There's also a lot of good advice on how to discipline yourself. One trick that I have used a lot over time is I've changed my discrimination to about what I see as food. So there's many things that I simply don't see as food, just because of some training. Candy, for example. I don't see candy as food. I don't see it. I see it actually as a poison. The reason I see it as a poison is because there have been times in my life where I've eaten too much sugar and I feel bad. And then I've read about, diabetes and some of the risks and so forth. So I'm like, it looks delicious, looks beautiful, right? But it's poison, right? So I go to the supermarket checkout line. There's candy bars on all sides and so forth. But I never see food in those aisles. I see poison or neutral things. I'm not trying to be too heavy. I'm not saying never eat candy. I sometimes eat candy, but I don't crave it, or extremely rarely. And it's just it's a view that you can develop. This is food. This is not food. Shop when you're not hungry. Classic advice. Okay, exercise regularly. I am not the right person to provide advice on this topic. I exercise irregularly, but I always feel better when I've exercised. It makes a powerful effect, and no question I feel for myself the benefits of a healthy diet. I feel for myself when I exercise. I feel better. So I can attest to the power of exercise. And then finally, get plenty of sleep. Is so important. I used to always sleep a lot. I used to fight to reduce how much I slept. Try to wake up earlier, go to sleep later, push and so forth. 8.5 hours. My body, my sleep demand was very inelastic, if you want. 8.5 hours. I can't really change that. So I gave up. Just started sleeping full nights, and my mind functions well. When I have been in situations where I forced myself to go without sleep, I was working on something so passionately, I went without sleep, I find my mental acuity is weaker, is significantly weaker. They've done studies that if you that you notice sleep deprivation seriously for a few days. If you have sustained sleep deprivation, you notice it for a few days. But after a while, you stop noticing sleep deprivation. You just kind of comes to feel normal. But your mental performance with sleep deprivation drops significantly, and it's a sustained reduction. If you sustain your sleep loss, your sleep deficit, you have a sustained cognitive deficit, but you feel like you're normal. So you feel like this is normal, but you're performing below your capability. So get adequate sleep, very important. Then avoid alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. I'm just trained in the Buddhist context. Buddhists do not take any intoxicants, no alcohol, tobacco, drugs. Buddhist or clergy ordained people and lay people who take what are known as the 5 precepts completely abstain from intoxicants. There are many, many lay people who don't, take the 5 precepts. But anyway, it's something that Buddhists have a lot of familiarity with, abstaining from alcohol and so forth. As a result, even after I've stopped being a monk, I've had alcohol from time to time, but I have no ability to handle, alcohol. It just makes me sleepy. So I've been fortunate enough to not actually have any interest in those things. But I'm definitely in a minority there, because most people have strong interest in alcohol or drugs or tobacco or whatever. Most people rely on it very, very heavily. So it's helpful for me to think about what is the underlying reason that Buddha advised his followers not to take intoxicants. Muslims totally abstain from alcohol, showing this example very strongly. Many people in other religions do as well. Or they have strong sense that you should abstain from tobacco or some other drugs. It's very, very ingrained in many of our cultures, secular and religious cultures, abstaining from intoxicants, including the 12-step program. People have gone through the 12-step program. They fear alcohol, because they know there's a risk, and they build a capability to resist and to avoid. So that our society actually has a lot of familiarity with the discipline of abstaining from these things. But why? Why does it matter? It doesn't matter. When I had my first beer after being a monk, it was a celebration 6 months after. Well, my wife got her green card and celebrated, and I had a beer. I didn't die. Nothing bad happened particularly. I kind of enjoyed it, a little tingly feeling, and it was nice. But it's not going to ruin anything. You have a drink every once in a while, that's not going to harm anything, unless you've promised not to, in which case you break your promise. But it's become something that we lean on, right? It becomes something where it's like, oh, such a bad day. Oh, gotta have a glass of wine. Oh, and it's something where we lean on it to make us feel better, right? And if you feel a little tense or a little, sad or depressed or whatever, you feel like not in a great mental space, what do you turn to? You've got some pick-me-up or settle-me-down drug, or some change-my-world drug. But it implies, it comes from a belief, there's an underlying belief that we can't make ourselves feel better without that. And that's actually a belief. It's a belief that we can't make ourselves feel better if we're a bit depressed, unless we have a drink. That's actually a belief, a limiting belief about ourselves, if you want. It's a belief that we don't have the power to make ourselves happy. How could that be true, right? You have the power to make yourself unhappy. We do have the power to make ourselves happy, right? Sometimes. Maybe we just didn't do it right, or don't quite remember how, or don't think we do, but it's a lack of confidence. And it's also a lack of skill, right? It's a lack of having the skills we need to make ourselves happy. So that is something where, if you don't have alcohol or drugs or whatever, if you have intentionally decided to avoid them, it means that you have to find a different way to be happy. You have to find a different way to feel relaxed. And, well, when you get a little bit desperate, you find it. It's a funny thing, right? Like, if you have to find a way to not be depressed, and it can't be alcohol, well, you'll find a way to not be depressed. You'll buy a puppy, you'll take a walk, you'll reach out to a friend and so forth. Of course, sometimes people have severe depression where it's not that easy. But in the case of most people who just have the minor mental illness, low-level mental illness that all humans have, then we find a way, right? We find a way to feel relaxed. We find a way to feel excited. We find a way to shift our reality. We find a way to connect with people, to not be shy. And we can do it. And what happens when you start living without alcohol, when you start living without drugs? You actually build a lot of skill, right? You build a lot of emotional skill that you wouldn't have built otherwise, because you didn't have to, right? But when you have to, and that was absolutely my experience when I was a monk, I I couldn't touch a woman's body. I couldn't hug, right? I couldn't cuddle. I couldn't have sex, and so forth, no matter how much I wanted to. That was my vow, right? So it was something that I couldn't lean on if I was feeling lonely, right? Lean on if I was feeling tired. I couldn't come home at night like I can today and hug my wife or cuddle with my wife and so forth. So what it meant is that I built a strength. I built an emotional strength. I built the strength of how to live alone, and so I can live very peacefully alone. I love being with my wife as well, and I've chosen to live this life now, but abstaining from something you normally lean on, right, forces you to build your own muscles, right? Just think about if I'm leaning on my cane, right, I'm not using the muscles that I actually have. And so we're atrophying emotionally atrophied, spiritually atrophying, right? So think of it as building your own strength, you know, maybe that just means one drink less a night, for example. Go to bed earlier. Or maybe it means a day without any substance, or a week, or a month, or something. All of these things are powerful. Anyway, hope that helps. Thank you.